Hi, I'm Chris Sangster, and welcome back to the studio. Today we are going to be setting up and testing the Sonarworks Reference ID microphone and software. I've never personally tried any type of speaker or room calibration software in this studio before, so I'm excited to see what kind of results I get when testing this room. Up until now, I have relied on my ear and reference material to tune the acoustic treatment in this space. But being just a spare bedroom in a residential home and not a custom design space, I'm sure there's room for improvement. Let's head over to the unboxing table and see what comes included with the Sonarworks Reference ID. All right, so here we are unboxing the Sound ID reference from Sonarworks. Let's go ahead and open this up and see what's in the box. This is the mic. Pretty standard mic clip. I assume this is right. But my gosh, that is a tight fit. I literally can't even get it on there. There we go. That is quite possibly the tightest fitting mic clip I've ever used in my life. Okay, now that we have everything unboxed, the next step is a pretty straightforward, standard, create an account, download the app, install the app, authenticate the app type of process. Just go to sonarworks.com and follow the instructions. It will install two different applications on your computer. First, the Sound ID Reference app, and secondly, the Sound ID Reference Measure app. To get started, launch the Reference app and add the output of your audio interface to the list on the left-hand side of the application window. Then click Open Measure to launch the Reference Measure app and start testing your room acoustics. To get started with the testing process, you need to plug the microphone into a mic pre on your interface and make sure that phantom power is on. This is a cardioid microphone we're working with. For my setup, I've plugged the mic straight into a pre on my UAD Apollo. This is the mic pre I have with the least amount of coloration, and I believe the cleaner the mic pre, the better the readout will be while testing. Make sure your input and output devices are the same or clocked to the same source, and make sure the mic signal is not coming through your speakers. So mute it in your console if you're using UAD. Select the channel your microphone is on from the drop-down list and then tap it to test that the signal is passing through properly. Once you have loaded your microphone's response profile and tested that your speakers are configured properly, you are ready to start the testing process. Here, Sonarworks tells you that you can either hand-hold the microphone or use a stand to do the testing. I wonder if it'll be different if I do it on a stand. I would personally recommend using a stand. This way, you're sure that the height of the microphone stays the same throughout the testing, and you can make sure the microphone remains completely still while testing. If you hold it, you do have a tendency to wobble around a little bit, and I just feel like that's not the best for this kind of test. Now, place the mic in your listening position. Honestly, this was a bit of a challenge for me and also kind of a vague instruction. Like, should it be at ear level? Should it be at the front of your head? The middle of your head? Is it in the right spot? Am I doing it right? I don't know. They don't really specify. I just went with my gut here and placed the mic at the level of my ear in the direct center of my speakers, basically where the middle of my head in between my ears would be while mixing. This seemed to work out just fine, but once again, it was pretty vague. Next, they have you test the level of the input signal. Now, this was another vague instruction, as it instructs you to adjust the speakers so the sound of the voice coming out is at a normal conversation volume.
Please adjust the volume of your output device. My voice should sound at normal conversation volume.
Honestly, this seems pretty subjective to me for what should be an objective testing process. But I just went with my gut, and honestly, my level that I used ended up being quite a bit louder than my typical mixing level. So I did a couple different tests at a couple different levels, and I found that it honestly didn't really make much of a difference so long as the microphone could hear the test signals properly. On the input side of things, I also found that I had to set the gain on my microphone preamp like incredibly loud in order to get it in the green area for the app to proceed. Not really sure why this is, but again, I just rolled with it. It seemed to work out fine. Kind of weird. Not really sure what the deal was. Next, you will test both speakers individually and then test from your listening position. From these 3 measurements, the software will guess at the dimensions of the triangle created between your speakers and your listening position. Now, I highly recommend measuring these distances for yourself, as I found the software to be off by about 2 inches on the distance between my speakers.
I think it's 2.9.
And you can just manually adjust the dimensions in the app to reflect your own measurements.
All right, I think maybe one of the more difficult parts about this is going to be getting a quiet environment today. Seems to be noisy around my house. So, all right, so there was a trash truck and a plane going by when I was doing that measurement. I think I'm going to try that again.
All right, now the fun part begins. You will measure 37 different points around your room. The app will show you where to put the microphone for each point. It then will use a series of clicks to localize your microphone. And once it recognizes that you have the mic in the correct position, it will play a sine wave sweep from each speaker to take the measurement. Now, I found myself trying to be as accurate as possible with getting the mic placement right in the center of that target area. It was almost like a video game to me or something, but it won't be exact. And honestly, from my testing, I think that's fine. I did back-to-back tests, one trying to be super accurate with the target area, and then one where I just kind of approximated it, and it really made no difference to the readout. So once you've gone through all 37 testing points, you will get this readout of the frequency response of your room and the option to save this as a preset in the Sonarworks software.
So I will say, just while this session is loading, it's an interesting process to do the testing. 37 points is a lot to do. It takes a little bit longer than I thought it would, but it's interesting how it works, how it localizes the microphone with those ticks, and then plays that sweeping sine wave kind of test tone on each speaker. And then using those 37 data points, I guess it does some kind of software wizardry to give you that graph.
The software can be used as a plugin in your DAW or as a standalone software that becomes the output of your system. So what the software does is apply an EQ that's inverse to this readout in order to make the frequency response of your room as flat as possible.
All right, so we'll save and finish. This is really interesting how much of a dip I have at 95. 9 dB dip? Like, so that means I could be adding way too much at 94 hertz, 95 hertz than I think I should. Yeah, I mean, this room is well treated. It's obviously a bedroom in a house. It's not an ideal recording studio, but it's well treated. But yeah, man, I mean, that's anything but rural or flat. So it just goes to show you, even when you treat your room properly, like if you're working in a home studio, you're still gonna have these kind of frequency imbalances. So super interesting.
Now, at this stage, I would recommend going through an extra step if you have the time and resources. I would try adjusting your acoustic treatment, the settings of your speakers, your subwoofer, and even possibly your mixing position to get the best response out of your room and to get it as close to flat as possible before applying the Sonarworks EQ. To me, the less amount of EQ the software has to apply, the better results you will get. Now, this is a process of trial and error and honestly will take a significant amount of time, but I believe it's worth it. The real power of this Sonarworks program is the knowledge you gain about how the acoustics of your studio are behaving and then being able to make adjustments based on that data and not just guesswork. So once you have your room acoustics dialed in as best as you possibly can and have done a final round of testing to establish your EQ curve, now it's time to integrate the Sonarworks EQ into your workflow. I find that using the standalone software is the easiest option. It works silently in the background, it doesn't need to be bypassed for bounce down, and it applies the EQ curve to everything you play through your system, not just what's coming out of your DAW. The one drawback, though, is that the app becomes your default output from your DAW. So you can't access more than the first two outputs of your interface. So if you're using some external hardware, for example, you're going to need to use the plugin instead of the standalone app. Okay, a few notes on some of the settings in the software. The Safe Headroom feature is a great setting to have turned on, but I found it requires some tweaks to your monitor control settings in order for things to work properly. This feature lowers the output gain from the software in order to not create clipping when the EQ is applied. Now that's a great feature, but because of this compensation, your playback will be quieter than you're used to. If you, like me, always mix at a consistent volume, you will have to adjust the gain of your interface or monitor controller to compensate for this. Not a big deal, but a step you don't want to miss. The next setting to pay attention to is what Sonarworks calls the filter type. You can choose from linear phase, mixed, or zero latency. And personally, I would change this setting based upon what kind of work I'm doing. For mixing, I would certainly recommend choosing linear phase, so there's no phase distortion introduced by the EQ that could possibly influence your mixing decisions. You can see the phase response on these orange and red lines, and that is not something I would want to contend with while mixing. For recording, on the other hand, I would probably choose zero latency so that there's no latency introduced into the signal, especially if you're using a zero latency system like the UAD Apollo. There are a few other settings like compensation for differences in your speakers, as well as a limiting factor for how much EQ is applied. I did not have any discrepancies in my speakers, so I left that function disabled. And for the limit controls, I found the default settings to be the best way to go. One final note I have is about the translation check feature. All right, honesty time. I find this concept to be utterly useless. Applying EQ to try and mimic a different kind of playback system doesn't really make any sense to me. A laptop speaker or a car stereo system not only has different physical characteristics than your studio monitors do, but you also listen to those sources in different environments than your studio. I don't think an EQ can really replicate those differences. Furthermore, part of the magic of something like the car test is that it's a playback system that you are intimately familiar with. You've listened to hours upon hours of music in your car, and you know what good mixes sound like in your car. Therefore, you can make an accurate assessment of your own mixes against that baseline. Applying some standard EQ to your studio monitors can't even approximate that. It's not going to make your studio sound like your car. Listen, Sonarworks is great at assessing and compensating for frequency response discrepancies in your home studio. Use it for that purpose. Save the car test for the car. All in all, I found the Sonarworks SoundID reference to be a very enlightening and useful tool, albeit a bit too non-specific in the setup stage for my personal taste. But stay tuned to my channel for a completely separate video on the specifics of how I integrated Sonarworks into my studio and workflow, the changes I made to my studio because of its readouts, and how it will help me going forward. Thanks as always for checking out this video. If you liked what you saw, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you at the studio next time. Thanks.